Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, From Data to Cures, Speeding the Process for Rare Diseases. For over 30 years, the National Organization for Rare Disorders has focused on the health and well-being of people living with rare diseases and their loved ones. We want you to know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, our commitment to serving you is stronger than ever. My name is Katie Kowalski. I work in the Education Department at NORD, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today's webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is to share information about the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator, which is a data analytics platform aimed at speeding up drug development for rare diseases. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Michelle Campbell is the Senior Clinical Analyst for Stakeholder Engagement and Clinical Outcomes for FDA's Office of New Drugs at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Her focus is in patient-focused drug development and the use of patient experience data in the regulatory setting. Jane Larkindale is the Executive Director of the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator Data and Analytics Platform at CPATH. In addition, she runs the Duchenne Regulatory Science Consortium, Friedreich's Ataxia Integrated Clinical Database, and the new Sickle Cell Disease Consortium at Critical Path Institute. And Vanessa Boulanger is the Director of Research at the National Organization for Rare Disorders. She leads the development, growth, and implementation of NORD's scientific and research activities. Thank you for being with us today, and I'll turn it over to Michelle to get us started.
Well, thank you, Katie, and thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. As Katie said, my name is Michelle Campbell, and I'm in the Office of Neuroscience, which is in the Office of New Drugs in CDER at FDA, and I'm here to introduce you to a new initiative that the FDA is funding to accelerate rare disease cures. And specifically this afternoon, we'll be highlighting one aspect of the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator, the Data and Analytics Platform. As I'm sure you know, through your own journeys as patients or caregivers of patients through the lived experience of a rare disease, there's often many challenges in finding a treatment as well as developing optimal treatments for patients. And there are many questions when we look into the drug development aspect for our rare diseases of what we need to know to be able to have optimal clinical trials, be able to allow us to be able to determine if we have an efficacious drug. The challenges you see on the screen are probably ones that you have faced yourself once there was a diagnosis, or even after or wondering before, such as what is known about the disease, specifically when we talk about disease characterization and the natural history. What is the progression of the disease? Is it a slowly progressive disease or is it rapidly progressive? What is the cause of the disease? Is it a genetic base? Was it a random mutation in a gene? Is that known? Is the diagnostics available? The other part is what is important to patients with the disease that they have, what matters most to patients, what is currently available treatments or standard of care that's available. And then when we get to our clinical trials, and if we're able to have a molecule make it that far, we need to know, first and foremost, has the preclinical safety testing done for the safety and use in the humans? Is it safe to be tested in a way? Do we have a study protocol? Is the study design optimal? And patients access to trial sites. These are all challenges that we face when we're trying to put together optimal clinical trials, which really leads the need to be able to have what we are calling a Rare Disease Cures Accelerator. And we see this as an by adopting a cooperative research approach that can accelerate the move from the bench science to the bedside. We would like this Rare Disease Cures Accelerator to provide an infrastructure for cooperative scientific approach to clinical trial readiness in the rare diseases to help identify what do we need to be able to get a clinical trial up and running and those learnings prior to coming to FDA for an IND. We see key components in this Rare Disease Cures Accelerator include a centralized and standardized infrastructure that will support rare disease characterization, and that's what we'll be speaking on most this afternoon. The second is the standard core sets of clinical outcome assessments. Clinical outcome assessments are what is used to measure how a patient feels or functions, and is often used as the endpoints support trial efficacy, or is there a treatment benefit in patients? There's often challenges in selecting optimal clinical outcome assessments in our rare disease population. And so we hope that by development of standard core clinical outcome assessments will help. And finally, develop a global rare disease clinical trials network, because we know that this development is global in nature. The standard core sets of the clinical outcome assessments and the clinical trials networks are aspects that are ongoing through some other opportunities right now at CEDAR, but they are part of this Rare Disease Cures Accelerator. But speaking specifically on the data and analytics platform, we see that this platform is a neutral, independent data collaboration and analytics hub that is a partnership between the Critical Path Institute and NORD. The primary objective of the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator will be to establish a data management and data repository system that can be used to house data from existing and planned rare disease clinical studies and trials that will be contributed from different organizations. This platform will leverage existing scientific expertise in data management and rare disease knowledge while we partner with scientific organizations. This platform will build clinical trial readiness in the pre-competitive space to foster innovation for patients with rare diseases. So with this primary objective, we envision the clinical trials data analytics platform to look like this. On the left-hand side, you see different parts of different types of data that can be collected from various data sources, either through a clinical trial participation, through a patient registry or clinician's registry, natural history studies. We could have genomic data. And we hope that by pooling all of this data together, we can curate it and standardize it into data sets that can be used for various types of analytic options, such as basic descriptives of what does the patient population look like, to advanced modeling that can help us look at disease progression or optimal clinical trial endpoints, and possibly needed sample size and inclusion-exclusion criteria. What we hope in the end is that by pulling together all of these data sets, we'll be able to have actionable drug development solutions. And we need all of our stakeholders, including you, to be part of this, particularly in the beginning with data and contributing data into this program, and at the end of when we get the data that comes out of this and these data sets, and how do we formulate these actionable drug development solutions. At this time, I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Jean Larkindale from the Critical Path Institute, who will talk a little bit more about what the data can do.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you all for joining this webinar. As Michelle says, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of this platform, why you may want to contribute data, why you might want to engage with the platform, and really what this platform will do, and how a data platform can possibly accelerate drug development for rare diseases, which is, of course, what we're all really interested in. So this is another little infographic that really describes what the RDCA-DAP is. As Michelle said, we're starting with an input of existing data. We're not asking you to enter your data again. We're not starting a new patient registry. We're not starting any kind of new data collection. What we're trying to do is take all the data that's already been out there collected on various rare diseases and get it into one place and make it usable by the entire community. So we're interested in all sorts of different types of data, whether it comes from a clinical trial or a natural history study or a patient registry, or in the future, even direct from electronic health records, and trying to get that data into one place. Each data set will be owned by somebody, somebody already or controlled by somebody, really. The patient himself or herself owns the data. But we the RDCA-DAP, will talk to that person, put a legal agreement in place to, first of all, make sure that you, the patient, has given consent for the data to be shared, but also so that that custodian of the data can tell us what we can do with the data. Can we share it with everybody? That's always my favorite. But sometimes there are reasons in place why a more limited number of people should have access to the data, and we write that into that legal agreement to make sure that RDCA-DAP only uses the data in ways that the patients have said they can be used, and that custodian says the data can be used. Once that agreement's in place, we set up a secure data transfer to move the data in a very secure way from where it is into our servers. Then we go through a whole process of exploring that data, understanding that data, and mapping it to standards so that the data is as standardized as possible. And we know that when we combine data sets, that we're only adding apples to apples and not mixing up the apples and oranges and bananas into one place, so we end up with a fruit salad of nonsense. But instead, we have very organized data that will help us compare and contrast data within diseases and across diseases and really learn as much as we can from that data. At that point, we'll make the data available that we can make available. That really depends on what you, the patient, have said and what the custodian tells us. And through our analytics platform, we will also work with the data and develop tools and analysis that will also be made available. And at the same time, we'll be going back to those data custodians and helping them improve data collection so their data will be even more useful in the future, with the hope that they'll continue to contribute. And cyclically over time, we'll end up with better and better data collections and a better and better understanding of rare diseases. So why would people want to share data with us? And I think as patients and families, it's very clear that we all want treatments and cures for our diseases. Our data individually is powerful. It's valuable. It can be used to benefit the understanding of your disease, but also all sorts of other rare diseases, so we can understand what to measure in a clinical trial. What symptoms do you have compared to another group of patients? And really understand what it is that we want to treat, what is it that you, the patient, want to treat, and how we might be able to go about it. So there are lots of platforms that talk about sharing data, but what's special about us is that all the data in our system is patient level, which helps us understand the variability of disease. I think we know that rare diseases, just like common diseases, aren't 100% homogeneous. We don't all look at each disease in the same way. There's a lot of variability, and we need to understand that so we can understand if a drug's working or not. We can integrate data sets. So if there are lots of small collections of data around the world, each one's not going to tell us that much. But if we bring them all together into one place, we really start to understand that disease. And of course, we can learn. There are cross-learnings across diseases, I mentioned earlier. And very importantly, we let each contributor tell us how widely we can share the data and what we can do with it. So what use is this data anyway? Why do we want data on rare diseases? So if you look on the left, we have a very traditional drug development approach where you go about, you come up with a good idea of what a drug is, and you look into a crystal ball. Well, really, you go and ask your local clinician, how do I test this? How many patients should I look at? For how long? And what should I measure? And really, it's pretty much guesswork and a little bit of experience as to what that clinical trial looks like. Effectively, you're looking into a crystal ball. What we want to do is move into the big, brave new world where when you look into that crystal ball, you have all the data that's ever been collected on that disease, all the analysis of that data that's ever been done, and as you design that new clinical trial, it's based on all the information you could possibly have, so it's designed as effectively as possible. Now, for some diseases, we don't have that much data yet, and it may still involve a fair bit of guesswork. But over time, as we learn and we add more and more data to that crystal ball, the more we'll know and the easier it will be to test new drugs as quickly and efficiently as possible. And to find out at the end of the clinical trial if your drug works, which would be great, or even at least know definitively it doesn't work, so you can stop wasting your time on that and move to something that will work. And that's really the goal of this platform, is making sure we know as much as we can about the patient population, the variability in the patient population, what can be measured, how it can be measured, so we will understand what drugs to test in a given population and how to test them in a way that's as efficient as possible. I'm going to get a little bit data-y here, but really not too bad. This is an example of some work we did through my Duchenne Regulatory Science Consortium that's been in place for several years at this point, and looking particularly at trying to understand how to test a drug in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which I think most people probably know is a rare disease, although not as rare as many. If you look at the graph on the left where it says NSAA, that stands for the North Star Ambulatory Assessment, but that doesn't really matter. It's an outcome assessment, and each of those little circles is a single measurement. And if you look at all those little gray circles, I think you'll agree with me that basically the conclusion from that graph is it's a mess. It's a very variable population. Each patient changes differently over time, and it's really hard to see a pattern, although if you look at the blue line, there actually is a pattern to how a North Star changes over time. And what happens as a result of that, if you look on the top right, the two boxes there, if you have this mess of little blue dots that represent individual patients' observations, and then you add a drug, you get little purple dots. And you can't really tell if the drug worked or not because there's so much overlap between what the patients look like and what the patients on drug look like. It may have worked, we can't really tell. What we're trying to do with DRISC, which is really an example of what we want to do across the Rare Disease Cures Accelerator, is look at modeling that outcome over time and a whole lot of other outcomes and understand that there are different populations of patients. Some progress fast, those in red, some progress slow, those in green, and some are somewhere in the middle. And explaining who those patients are. Then we can look at a certain population of patients and compare them to those on drug. And now you can see that those blue patients in the middle are very clearly distinguished from the purple dots. And this theoretical drug clearly works. We can use fewer patients in the trial, hopefully do the trial over a shorter period of time, but come out at the other end really knowing if this drug works or not. Of course, in my example, I've shown a drug that does work, because that's what we're all hoping for. But that's what we're trying to do with the data, is understand the natural history of disease, understand how to run effective trials, how to run shorter trials, smaller trials, and still know at the other end whether a drug will work or not. And your data can help contribute to that. By sharing data with the community, we can answer 1 million questions about how to test a new drug, what symptoms change over time, how they change in the population, and really help us understand whether a new drug works or not. So I'm really excited by this project. I think we can change how drug development is being done for rare diseases using data, some that already exist and some that we'll collect in the future. And it's going to be really exciting as we move forwards. So thank you. My email address is there. Feel free to contact me with questions if you have any. But for now, I'm going to pass over to Vanessa Boulanger from NORD, who's going to tell you a little bit more about how you too can get involved in this project. So thank you very much. And Vanessa, over to you.
Thank you to my colleagues Michelle and Jane for their thoughtful presentation on this important and complex initiative. I'd like to start just by bringing us back to some of the high-level challenges to rare disease drug development, and then touch on how the RDCA-DAP is designed to provide solutions to some of these challenges in order to accelerate our understanding of rare diseases, how they progress, how the disease looks or changes over time, the presentation of the disease in different people, for example, and then how to leverage that information to help inform the design of clinical trials. So we know that there are over 7,000 rare diseases and fewer than 10% have an FDA-approved treatment. Many rare conditions are not even being studied yet, and we as a community have a big opportunity to change that. There are a lot of different types of data and information that we can bring together to increase our understanding of these diseases now, while new data is also being generated. Designing RDCA-DAP to overcome some of the persistent challenges to rare disease drug development is a priority for CPAP and NORD, so that as a rare disease community, we can collect better data, design better trials, and get treatments ready for approval faster. So by bringing rare disease data together in a central location, RDCA-DAP aims to promote an in-depth understanding of the different characteristics and natural history of a rare disease, accelerate our understanding of rare conditions and encourage commercial or research interest, encourage innovation and the refinement of clinical trial design so that resources, time, financial, and human are utilized efficiently and trials are planned with inclusivity and accessibility in mind, and promote the sharing and expanded use of existing data, opening opportunities for within and across disease discovery. So together, how do we build the foundation of rare disease information that we need to accelerate the cures for rare diseases? Each person, each experience is so critically important and valuable to unlocking the next advancement for their rare condition. Working together to make the experience of sharing data easy and, dare I say, enjoyable, while also ensuring that data is collected in the most usable way, is the foundation needed in order to support the development of treatments that are meaningful, so reflecting the preferences and priorities of rare communities, and available for use in shorter time frames. In other words, it is through this data that we arrive at a better understanding of rare diseases, what matters to people, what we need to measure, how to design studies, and develop the most impactful treatments. Bringing together data from clinical trials, natural history studies, patient registries, and other sources like clinical data will drive the RDCA-DAP model so we can do better science. Together with my colleagues at CPATH and FDA, we have developed some resources to help explain the value of sharing your experiences and to explain the process of participating in the study. So for example, here we have an infographic that explains the ways that patient data is key to advancing science for rare diseases. And here we have a video that explains what a registry is and how powerful participation in a patient registry can be. And here, I just wanted to point to the resource pages on CPATH and NORD's websites that have additional information about the RDCA-DAP initiative. The web pages are updated regularly with new content, and in the next few weeks, we will have additional resources related to the drug development process for rare diseases and how the RDCA-DAP can support each phase, which we're really excited to share with you all. And finally, we have listed contact information in this slide. So for those of you who are actively participating in studies, we encourage you and will support you in conversations about the RDCA-DAP with study sponsors. For those of you who are leading data collection efforts and are interested in sharing the data, we have included the contact information for CPATH so the discussion can continue. And if you are not currently participating in a patient registry or one doesn't exist for your condition, we encourage you to reach out to NORD to learn more about our platform. So I just wanted to bring all of the pieces together and distill how the RDCA-DAP can help. I know we have a really wonderful cross-section of stakeholders joining us today. So if you are seeking more in-depth information on RDCA-DAP, this webinar today is the third in the series, and I would encourage you to visit our website to view the webinars that we held in May and June, which we will also link to in our webinar follow-up, or of course you can feel free to reach out for further discussion. And I'd like to reinforce that this RDCA-DAP collaboration leverages the expertise, capabilities, and relationships across the founding partners of the initiative, CPATH, NORD, and the FDA, so that by partnering together, we can create greater value, efficiency, and effectiveness for the rare disease community. So in short, we want to hear from you. The relationships that we build through RDCA-DAP will support the growth and expansion of the initiative, and this is a really exciting way to advance rare therapies, and we really hope you'll join us. So thank you for tuning in today. We know everyone is balancing a whole lot, and we appreciate you sharing your time with us. I think we may have a few minutes for questions, so I'll turn it back to Katie. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you, Michelle and Jane and Vanessa, for sharing information about this visionary new platform that really has so much potential for pushing the needle forward in rare disease drug development. So yes, we've collected questions during the registration and live webinar, and I'll move to a Q&A. Before we begin, I have a quick announcement, and that is that RDCA-DAP virtual workshop will take place on October 19th to discuss updates and milestones that were reached during the initiative's first year. So you can attend and hear from industry experts and patient organizations who are contributing data and learn more about how patient-level data is being maximized and may be used to develop tools to optimize and accelerate drug development across rare diseases. So, Jane, I think I'll start with you. There are a number of questions that have come in about data and privacy and confidentiality, and this one has two parts. First, how will data from different sources for the same patients be reconciled? And then how will you ensure that future data linkage won't make it possible to re-identify participants' data?
Thank you. Those are common questions and really good questions. I wish I had a better answer for the first part, which is until the day that within all studies, we're using a common global unique identifier. We can't identify the same patient in different data sets. By the time we access the data, I mentioned that we transfer it from its original custodian using a secure link. That data is de-identified. I don't know who you are, and all sorts of other information that would identify who you are has been stripped from the data. So there's no way I can go back and say, hey, here's Joe Boggs in this data set, and here he is over here. So we can't link different records for the same patient across data sets. I hope in the future we will start using global identifiers and make that possible so that we know here's patient 76 and there's patient 76. But for various reasons of patient privacy, we don't want to be able to identify patients. So I'm afraid I don't have a great answer for that first question. The second question of how we can make sure that patients aren't identified really comes back to this de-identification or anonymization process, where we make sure we don't know your name, we don't know your address, we don't know your date of birth, we may know your age, and then there's other information that may also need to be stripped depending on how rare or common your condition is. You can imagine that if there are 15 patients in the whole of the United States and you told me which state you're in, I would be able to find you. But if there are 100,000 patients across the country, the states can be less important information. So we will have to do different levels of de-identification depending on the commonality of the disease. When it comes to genomics data, that's perhaps the hardest one of all because, of course, everyone's genome is unique. And we haven't got a firm answer yet on what we can do there, but the most likely answer is that data will not be able to be downloaded and only specific analyses will be able to be done within the platform on that data. But we're still working through that with data privacy experts to make sure that we can't re-identify patients because obviously most patients don't want that and we certainly don't want that. So more to come as we work through that in more detail, but definitely something we're spending a lot of time thinking about right now.
Thank you. No, very, very helpful information. Vanessa, question for you. How or what can patient organizations do to speed up the path to drug development?
Yeah, thanks for this important question. So I'll answer with full recognition that patient organizations vary quite a bit in terms of where they are in their organizational development and growth processes. But I think that patient organizations are the nexus. They're the most in tune with the community. They're in a really powerful position to unify stakeholders around a common mission. By bridging patients, clinical providers, researchers, and companies, patient organizations can promote team science, which is collaboration that leverages the strengths and expertise of different players to address scientific challenges. That alone is a huge contribution to the design of science. And then, of course, for organizations who do have the financial capacity, establishing well-designed patient registries or natural history studies is a significant step towards supporting the path to drug development in terms of establishing foundational information on the disease, documenting preferences and outcomes that are important to patients and families that can be translated into potential endpoints, and informing the design of clinical trials. Even making your research questions known and partnering, if not leading, the project is an important step that can drive research forward. So in short, there's lots of ways, and leveraging the power of patients and patient communities is really key.
Great, thank you. And then I want to direct one question to Michelle. This is from a research center. So as a rare disease research center, how can we become involved? How can we best facilitate the involvement of our participants?
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, that's a really great question. So we encourage all stakeholders to consider participating in this initiative through data sharing. All type of research centers, academic centers, individual patient groups, industry sponsors are open and welcome to contribute and to be a part of this because we need all stakeholders, as I said, to be part of this initiative to really help us because each stakeholder brings their own unique set of data to the table, and that can only help us when we are able to pull it together to help us accelerate the answers we need in rare disease drug development. So I would say that if they're a research center, that they reach out to I think the website that was on the the last slides about if you're interested, do that reach out to learn more about it. What data do you have? What is the interest? What you need to know? With the Critical Path Institute in NORD has worked out a lot of information on data use agreements and data access, and a lot of those questions about who owns the data and who has access and things have been worked out. And so I would encourage them to reach out to the website. I think it's the RDCA.org/RDCA-DAP and to learn some more information. But I hope that, if you're not a research center and you're an individual patient and you want to contribute, there's ways to. Again, everyone is a stakeholder in this initiative, and we hope that all of our stakeholders will contribute.
Great. Thank you all. Well, we have unfortunately run out of time very quickly. I see a lot of great questions coming in from participants. We will try to get back to you with answers. And if you see the slide that's on the screen now, there's research programs at rarediseases.org. You can also send questions that way. So after this webinar, you're going to receive a short survey. Please fill it out because it really helps us to develop future webinars. And again, we'll be sending the slides and the recording to everybody who registered for this webinar. And we thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.